What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. First and foremost, before we get started, you already know the drill. Hit the subscribe button, hit the post notification bell, hit the like button, all that good stuff so you'll know whenever I put out any new content. Show the support, it's greatly appreciated. Back here today talking about another coaching candidate. Another day, another candidate. And today, the one we're going to be looking at has some history with us and, has some deep ties to the Atlanta Falcons. I guess you could say deep ties. Anyways, man, we're going to be looking at Raheem Morris, current defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams and former interim head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. So without further ado, man, let's get right into it. And look at his resume. The number one thing that has to be considered is he was in the Falcons organization for 6 seasons. And most notably, he was our interim head coach in 2020 after we fired Dan Quinn following an 0-5 start. And he went 4-7 over an 11-game stretch as interim. So he got an audition for the head coaching job. He basically got a test run to see what it would be like as head coach. Now, granted, you have to keep into consideration that the team that we had back in 2020, and obviously the circumstances is completely different versus what we're dealing with today. So that is the one thing to keep in mind when you look at that 4-7 record, but then you overall have to, look at other key elements as well. He was also a former head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for 3 seasons from 2009 to 11. He went 10-6 with the Buccaneers in 2010. That is the best record he has had as a head coach in the NFL. And he is a 2-time Super Bowl champion. He does have 2 rings to show for all of his work. One with the Buccaneers as an assistant all the way back in 2002. And as the Rams, as the defensive coordinator in the 2021 season. And when you look at his coaching history, it's pretty hefty. So just going to go ahead and go through all of it. He started off at his alma mater, Hofstra, as a graduate assistant, and then Cornell as a DB coach, and then went back to Hofstra as a DB coach 2000 to 01. So he has climbed his way up through the ranks, and you got to respect that. Before he went into the Tampa Bay organization for his first stint, where he spent time on the defensive staff, was a defense quality control guy, defensive assistant, and was the DB coach from 2002 to 05 over that span. He would then go to Kansas State in 2006, where he became the defensive coordinator, spending 1 season there. And then he would go back to Tampa Bay in 2007 and 08 as the DB coach before getting his first big gig in 2009 as the head coach of the Buccaneers, where he spent 3 seasons there. He had a 10-6 season, but he also had some very bad seasons. He had a 4-12 season that I believe got him fired. I think that was his last year in Tampa Bay as head coach. And then he would go back to Washington. Well, it would go to Washington. He'd go to the Washington Redskins in 2012, spend 3 seasons there as a DB coach. So Raheem has a lot of experience working with DBs. That's the number one thing to be said as you look at this resume. Before he would come here to the Falcons, and he would spend 6 seasons in an organization. He was an assistant head coach alongside Dan Quinn. He actually worked a little bit on the offensive side of the football. I don't really know who that's a testament on, but one way or another, he was the pass game coordinator. He was a wide receivers coach, and he was the co-defensive coordinator in 2019 and early 2020 before Dan Quinn was fired in 2020, and obviously he took over as interim head coach of the Falcons for the rest of the 2020 season, going 4-7 in that stretch before he would go out west to the LA Rams and has been the defensive coordinator there since 2021. So when looking at the pros of bringing Raheem Morris back to the organization, is he is certainly experienced. There is, I don't think, any denying that. He understands what it's like. He has experience at both the college and the pro level. He has bounced around the league for many years as a coach, and most notably, he has spent time in the Falcons organization, so he knows the team. And by the way, when this is one thing I do think you have to look at as a pro, that 0-5 start, it was, we blew 2 games in 2020 we absolutely should not have lost. And we got our butts kicked in versus Green Bay, butts kicked in versus Seattle. We lost to Carolina. And, when he took over from 0-5, it was a hefty hole to get out of. And obviously, we couldn't get out of it. We finished off 4-12. But one way or another, man, that team did not give up on him. They were definitely playing for him in 2020. There's no denying that. I think there might have only been one game where you go and you look at that, the Falcons, when you look at the final score, they just got blown out. And that might have been versus like the Saints or the Bucks. Well, there were both games. So even in those 2 games, the Falcons fought for him most of the game. So he definitely rallied that team behind him, and they made the most of that season. And obviously the situation the entire world was in, you got to keep some things in mind when looking at that season. And overall, when you look at it, he can fit well into the culture in Atlanta. He already understands it. So that's a big advantage to him. He already, obviously, there's only a certain amount of guys that are here from that 2020 season. I think on the defense side of the ball, if I'm not mistaken, I think Grady and AJ, those might be the only 2 still here from that 2020 season. But those 2 are leaders of the defense. So when you look at those 2 guys, they could definitely rally the entire locker room behind a Raheem Morris and then take that potential CEO head coaching approach where, he's over the entire team and he has his own guys, also, doing their own thing with the offensive side of the ball and all that. But there is definitely going to be some cons that you have to look at. Obviously, with the pros comes the cons. And when talking about that culture point, he understands the culture, but the culture he was a part of when he was here. Now, you can honestly debate if that culture has even changed much at all, but it was a culture that turned very sour with Dan Quinn leading the way. And Raheem played a part in that culture. Make no mistake about it. I definitely feel like he was a bright spot and he would get the guys up to play for him. And you look at, obviously, the situation, the roster situation to go along with the cap situation, it wasn't the most favorable. But with that being said, still, the culture in the locker room, it became very toxic, under Dan Quinn. And Raheem was able to rally them, but you still even saw when Raheem Morris was head coach, we blew games out of our ass. We blew a 17-point lead to the Bucks. We lost a game to the Lions we shouldn't have lost. We almost went into Kansas City and beat the Chiefs, but we couldn't pull that one out. And then you look at the head coaching record overall, 21-38 overall when you're speaking his entire time as a head coach. It's not really that appealing when you do look at it. And to me, that's when you look at it, you see his time in Tampa Bay, you see his time here, that just isn't appealing. Now, I will say, if Raheem were to come here, I feel like this might be, as head coach, maybe the best roster he has worked with coming in here. So that could definitely play a big role in it. And another thing, too, the defensive scheme that he really likes to run, it doesn't line up with what Ryan Nielsen likes to do. It just doesn't. There's a reason why, obviously you saw a big difference in that defense. And obviously, that defense was able to shine. If the players were really bought into it, then yes, that defense could go out and be productive. But it isn't like how that Ryan Nielsen defense was. It wasn't as consistent as it was. And to me, I really feel like you're looking at the big picture and the big thing of we already had this guy here. And that's going to overall lead me into my final thoughts. I have all the respect for Raheem Morris. He's an amazing coach. He can get a locker room to play for him. He did it in 2020, but we had a chance to hire this guy. I think a lot of y'all are forgetting that. We had a chance to hire this guy 3 years ago to bring him along as the full-time head coach, and we opted not to do it. We opted to go and bring in Arthur Smith. So one of the things also, to go into all of the, I know they interviewed Bill Belichick last night, but, to get into, all the other things too, whether they decide to obviously chase that one big name that we all know or they don't, do you really honestly feel like Arthur Blank and especially Rich McKay are going to go and admit they were wrong and not keeping Raheem Morris as head coach? That's just my personal thought. And, to me, that, and it's not necessarily even Raheem's fault, but you got to look at, the time, when Raheem was there and what the culture was like for the most part. You just couldn't close out games. And that's what one of the big things we're trying to change right now. But anyways, with that being said, man, that does overall do it for this one. Going to be back here with another one coming up. I don't know who I'm going to do. There's definitely some guys to still look at. Obviously, the Falcons have set their eyes on, who, whether you like it or not, it's time to face is their main target in Bill Belichick. But with that being said, definitely a lot more to talk about, and I'll see you guys in the next one.